Hi friends, continuing to the chapter The Interpretant of Maladies. Interpretender. At the tea stall, Mr. and Mrs. Das bickered about who should take Tina to the toilet. Eventually, Mr. Das rented when Mr. Das pointed out that he had given the girl her bath the night before. Mr. Das pointed out that he had given the girl her bath the night before. In the rear view mirror, Mr. Capsai watched as Mrs. Das emerged slowly from his bulky white ambassador, dragging her slaved, largely bare-legged across the back seat. She did not hold the little girl's hand as they walked to the restroom. They were on their way to see the Sun Temple at Konark. It was a dry, bright Saturday, the mid-July, heated temperature by steady ozone breeze. Ideal weather for sightseeing. Ordinarily, Mr. Kapasi would not have stopped so soon along the way, but less than 5 minutes. After, he would pick up the family that morning in the front of Hotel Sandy Villa. The little herd had complied. The first thing Mr. Kapasi have noticed when he saw Mr. Das and Mrs. Das standing with the children under the portico of the hotel was that they were very young, perhaps not even 30. In addition to Tina, they had two boys, Ronnie and Bobby, who appeared very close in the age and had teeth covered in a network of flashing silver wires. The family looked Indian but dressed as foreigners did. The children in the stiff, brightly colored clothing and the caps with translucent visors. Mr. Kapasi was astonished to the foreigner tourist. He was assigned to them regularly because he could speak English. Yesterday, he had driven an elderly couple from Scotland, both with spotted faces and fluffy white hair so thin it exposed their sunburned scalps. In comparison, the tanned, youthful faces of Mr. and Mrs. Das were all the most striking. When he introduced himself, Mr. Kapasi had pressed his palm together in the meeting, but Mr. Das squeezed hand like an American so that Mr. Kapasi felt it is his elbow. Mrs. Das, for her part, had flexed on one side of her mouth, smiling dutifully at Mr. Kapasi, without displaying any interest in him. As they waited to the tea stall, Ronnie, who looked like older of the two boys, clambered suddenly out of a back seat, interrupted by a goat tied to a stake in the ground. "Don't touch it," Mr. Das said. He glanced up from his paperback tour book, which said India in yellow letter and looked as if he had been published abroad. His voice, somehow tentative and a little shrill, sounded as though it had not yet settled into maturity. "I want to give it a piece of a gum," the boy called back as he tottered ahead. Mr. Das stepped out of a car and stretched his legs by pointing briefly to the ground. A clean-shaved man, he looked exactly like a magnified version of Ronnie. He had a sapphire blue visitor and was dressed in a short sneaker and a t-shirt. The camera slung around his neck with an impressive telephoto lens and numerous buttons and markings, was the only complicating that thing he wore. He frowned, watching as Ronnie rushed towards the goat, but appeared to have no intention of intervening. Bobby, make sure that your brother does not do any stupid things. I don't feel like that, Bobby said, not moving. He was sitting in the front seat beside Mr. Capasi, studying a picture of the elephant god taped to the glove compartment. No need to worry, Mr. Capasi said. They are quite tame. Mr. Capasi was 46 years old, with receding hair that had gone completely silver. But his butterscotch complexion and his unlined brow, which he treated in a spare moment of darts of lotus oil balm, make it easy to imagine what he must have looked like at an early age. He wore a grey trousers and a matching jacket style shirt, tapered at the waist with the short sleeves and a large pointed collar, made of a thin but durable synthetic material. He had specified both the cut and the fabric to his tailors. It was his perfumed uniform for giving tours because it did not get crunched during his long hours behind the wheels. Through the wild shields, he watched as Ronnie circled around the goat, touched it quickly on its side, then tottered back to the car. You left India as a child, Mr. Capasi asked when Mr. Das had settled once again into the passenger's seat. Oh, Mina and I were both born in America, Mr. Das announced with an air of sudden confidence. Born and raised. Our parents live there now in Asansol. They retired. We visit them every couple year. He returned to watch as the little girl ran towards the car, the wide purple bows of her sundress flopping on her narrow brown shoulders. She was holding to her chest a doll with yellow hair that looked as if it had been chopped as a punitive measure with a pair of dull scissors. This is Tina's first trip to India, isn't it, Tina? I don't have to go to bathroom anymore, Tina announced. Where is Meena? Mr. Das asked. Mr. Capasi found it strange that Mr. Das should refer to his wife by her first name when speaking to the little girl. Tina pointed to where Mrs. Das was purchasing something from one of the shirtless men who worked at the tea stall. Mr. Capasi heard one of the shirtless men sings a phrase from a popular Hindi love song as Mr. Das walked back to the car. But she did not appear to understand the word of the song, for she did not express irritation or embarrassment or react in any other way to the man's declaration. He observed her. She wore a red and a white checkered shirt that topped about her knees, a slip on her shoes with a square wooden heel, and a close-fitting blouse styled like a man undershirt. The blouse was decorated at a chest level with a callio apelu in the shape of a strawberry. She was a short woman with a small hand like paws, her frosty pink fingers nail painted to match her lips, and was slightly plump in her figure. Her hair, shown only a little longer than her husband's, was parted far to one side. She was wearing a large dark brown sunglasses with a pinkish tint to them, and carried a big straw bag almost as big as her torso, shaped like a bowl with a water bottle poked out of it. She walked slowly, carrying some puffed rice toast with the peanut and the chili pepper in a large packet made from the newspapers. Mr. Kipasi turned to Mr. Das. Where in America do you live? New Brunswick, New Jersey, next to New York. Exactly, I teach middle school there. What subject? Science. In fact, every year I take my students on a trip to the Museum of National History in the New York City. In a way, we have a lot in common. You should say you and I. How long have you been a tour guide, Mr. Kipasi? 5 years. Mrs. Das reached the car. How long is the trip? She asked, shutting the door. About 2.5 hours, Mr. Kipasi replied. At this, Mrs. Das gave an impatient sign, as if she had been travelling for her whole life without pause. She framed herself with a folded Bombay Film magazine written in English. I thought that the Sun Temple is only 18 miles north of Puri, Mr. Das said, tapping on the tour book. The roads to the Konark are poor. Actually, it is a distance of 22 miles, Mr. Kipasi explained. Mr. Das nodded, readjusting the camera strap where it had begun to calf the back of his neck. Before starting the ignition, Mr. Kipasi reached back to make sure the crank-like locks on the side of each of our back doors were secured. As soon as the car began to move, the little girl began to play with the lock on her side, clicking it with some effort forward and backward, but Mr. Das said nothing to stop her. She sat a bit slouched at one end of the back seat, not offering her puffed rice to anyone. Ronnie and Tina sat on either side of her, both snapping a bright green gum. Look, Bobby, said as the car began to gather speed. He pointed with his finger to the tall trees that lined the road. Look, Monkey, Ronnie shivered. Wow! They were seated in a group along the branches with a shining black faces, silver bodies, horizontal eyebrows, and crested head. Their long grey tail tangled like a series of a rope among the leaves. A few scratched themselves with a black leathery hands or swung their feet, staring as the car passed. We call them the Hanuman, Mr. Kipasi said. They are quite common in this area. As soon as he spoke, one of the monkey leaped into the middle of the road, causing Mr. Kipasi to brake suddenly, and another bounced on to the hood of a car, then sprang away. Mr. Kipasi beeped his horn. The children began to get excited, sucking it in their breath and covering their faces partially with their hands. They had never seen a monkey outside of a zoo, Mr. Das explained. He asked Mr. Kipasi to stop the car so that he could take a picture. While Mr. Das adjusted his telephone lens, Mrs. Das reached into her straw bag and pulled out a bottle of an colorless nail polish, which she proceeded to stroke on the tip of her index finger. The little girl stuck out a hand. Mine too. Mommy, do mine too. Leave me alone, Mrs. Das said, blowing on her nail and turning her body slightly. You are making me mess up. The little girl occupied herself by buttoning and unbuttoning a pinafore on the doll plastic body. All set, Mr. Das said, replacing the lens cap. The car rattled considerably as it raced along the dusty road, causing them all to pop up from their seats every now and then. But Mrs. Das continued to polish her nails. Mr. Kipasi eased up on the accelerator, hoping to produce a smoother ride. When he reached for the gear shift, The boy in the front accommodated him by swinging his hairless knees out of the way. Mr. Kipasi noted that this boy was slightly player than the other children. Daddy, why is the driver sitting on the wrong side of the car too? The boy asked. They all do that here, dummy, Ronnie said. Don't call your brother a dummy, Mr. Das said. He turned to Mr. Kipasi. In America, you know, it confessed them. Oh, yes, I am very well aware, Mr. Kipasi said. As delicately as he could, he shifted gears again, accelerating as they approached a hill in the road. I see it is on Dallas, the steering wheel, or on the left side hand. What's Dallas? Tina asked, banging her now naked doll on the seat behind Mr. Kipasi. I went off the air, Mr. Das explained. It is a television show. They were all like siblings. Mr. Kipasi thought that as they have passed a row of date trees. Mr. and Mrs. Das behave like an older brother and sister, not parents. It seems that they were in charge of children only for the day. It was hard to believe they are regularly responsible for anything other than themselves. Mr. Das taped on his lens cap and his tour book, dragging his thumbnail occasionally across the pages so that they made a scraping sound. Mrs. Das continued to polish her nails. She had still not removed her sunglasses. Every now and then, Tina renewed her plea that she wanted her nails done too. And so at one point, Mrs. Das flicked a drop of a polish on the little girl's finger before depositing the bottle back inside her straw bag. Isn't this an air conditioner car? She asked, still blowing on her hand. The window on Tina's side was broken and could not be rolled down. Quite complaining, Mr. Das said, it isn't so hot. I told you to get a car with air conditioning. Mr. Das continued. Why do you do this, Raj? Just to save a few stupid rupees. What are you saving us 50 cents? The accent sounded just like the one Mr. Kipasi heard on American television program, though not like the one on Dallas. Doesn't it get tiresome? Mr. Kipasi told the people the same thing every day. Mr. Das asked, rolling down his own window all the ways. Hey, do you mind stopping the car? I just want to get a shot of this guy. Mr. Kipasi pulled over the side of the road as Mr. Das took a picture of an barefoot man, his head wrapped in a dirty turban, seated on the top of a guard of a grain sack pulled by a pair of a bullock. Both the man and the bullock were emaciated. In the back seat, Mrs. Das gazed out another window at the sky where nearly the transparent clouds passed quickly in front of one another. I look forward to it, actually, Mr. Kipasi said as they continued on their way. The Sun Temple is one of my favorite places. In that way, it is rewarded for me. I give tours on Friday and Saturday only. I have another job during the week. Oh, where? Mr. Das asked. I work in doctor office. You are a doctor? I am not a doctor. I work with one as an interpreter. What does a doctor need an interpreter for? He has a number of Gujarati patients. My father was in Gujarati, but many people do not speak Gujarati in this area, including the doctor. As so, the doctor asked me to work in his office interpreting what the patient says. Interesting, I have never heard of anything like that, Mr. Das said. Mr. Kipasi shrugged. Is it a job like any other? But so romantic, Mr. Das said dreamingly, breaking her extended silence. She lifted her pinkish brown glass and arranged them on the top of her head like an tiara. For the first time, her eyes met Mr. Kipasi in the rear view mirror. Pale, a bit smaller, their gaze fixed but drowsy. Mr. Das craned to look at her. What is so romantic about it? I don't know something, she shrugged, knitting her brows together for an instant. Would you like to piece a gum, Mr. Capassi? She asked brightly. She reached into her straw bag and handed him a small square wrapped in a green and a white striped paper. As soon as Mr. Capassi put the gum in his mouth, a thick, sweet liquor burst on his tongue. Tell us more about your job, Mr. Capassi, Mrs. Das said. What would you like to know, madam? I don't know, she struggled, munching on some puffed rice and licking the mustard oil from the corner of her mouth. Tell us a typical situation. She settled back in the seat, her head tilted in a patch of sun, and closed her eyes. I want a picture what happened. Very well. The other day a man came in with a pain in his throat. Did he smoke cigarette? No, it was very curious. He complained that he felt as if there was no long pieces of an straw stuck in his throat. When I told the doctor, he was unable to prescribe the proper medication. That's so neat. Yes, Mr. Capassi against agreed after some hesitation. So these patients are totally dependent on you, Mr. Das said. She spoke slowly, as if she were thinking aloud. In a way, more dependent on you than the doctor. How do you mean? How could it be? Well, for example, if you could tell the doctor that the pain felt like a burning, not straw, the patient would never know what you had told the doctor, and the doctor wouldn't know that you had told the right thing, wrong thing. It is a big responsibility. Yes, a big responsibility you have there. Mr. Capassi, Mr. Das agreed. Mr. Capassi had never thought of his job in such an complimentary terms. To him, it was an thankless occupation. He found nothing noble in interpreting the people's maladies, astonishing translating the symptoms of so many swollen bones, countless cramps of beliefs and the bowels spout on the people's palms that changes the colors, size or shape. The doctor, nearly half his way, had an affinity for the bell-bottom trousers and made a homeless jokers about the Congress party. Together, they worked in a stale little infantry where Mr. Capassi smartly tailored cloth slung to him in the heat. In spite of an back end, blades of an ceiling fan crooning over his heads. The job was a sign of his failing. In his youth, he has been a devoted scholar of foreign languages, the owner of an impressive collection of the dictionaries. He had dreamed of being an interpreter for the diplomat and the dignitaries, resolving the conflict between the people and the nation, settling the disputes of which he alone could understand both the sides. He was a self-educated man in a series of a notebook in the evening before his parents settled his marriage. He had listed the common etymologies of the words, and at one point in his life he was confident that he could converse if given the opportunity in English, French, Russian, Portuguese and Italian, not to mean Hindi, Bengali, Orissa and Gujarat. Now only a handful of European phrases remained in his memory, scattered words for the things like saucers and chairs. English was the only non-Indian language he spoke fluently anymore. Mr. Capassi knew it was not a remarkable talent. Sometimes he feared that his children knew better English than he did. Just from their watching television, still it came in handy for the tours. He has taken the job as an interpreter after his first son, at the age of 7, contracted typhoid. That was how he had first made the acquaintance of the doctor. At the time, Mr. Kepasi had been teaching English in a grammar school, and he battered his skills as an interpreter to pay the increasingly exorbitant medical bills. In the end, the boy had died one evening in his mother's arm, his limbs burning with the fever, but then there was a funeral to pay for, and the other children who were born soon enough, and the newest, the bigger house, and the school, good school, and the tutors, and the fine shoes, and the televisions, and the countless other way he tried to console his wife and to keep her from the crying in her sleep. And so when the doctor offered to pay him twice as much as he earned at the grammar school, he accepted. Mr. Kepasi knew that his wife had little regard for his career as an interpreter. He knew it, remembered her of a sons he had lost, and that she rested the other lives he helped in his own small way to save. If ever she referred to his position, she used the phrases doctor's assistant, as if the process of interpretation were equal to talking someone's temperature or changing a bedpan. She never asked him about the patient who came to the doctor's office, or said that his job was big responsibility. For this reason is flattered Mr. Kepasi that Mrs. Dawes was so interrogated by his job. Unlike his wife, she had reminded him of his intellect challenges. She had also used the word romantic. She did not behave in a romantic way towards her husband, and yet she had used the word to describe him. He wondered if Mr. and Mrs. Das were a bad match, just as he and his wife were. Perhaps they too had a little in common apart from 3 children and a decade of their lives. The single he recognized from his own marriage was there, the bickering, the indifference, the portrayed silences. Her sudden interest in him, an interest she did not express in either her husband or her children, was midly intoxicating. When Mr. Kepasi thought once again about how she had said romantic, the feeling of intoxication grew. He began to check his reflection in the rearview mirror as he drove, feeling grateful that he has chosen the grey suit that morning and not the brown one, which tends to sag a little in the knees. From time to time, he glanced through the mirror at Mrs. Das. In addition to glancing to her face, he glanced at the strawberry between her breast and the golden brown hollow in her throat. He decided to tell Mrs. Das about another patient and another, the young women who have complained of a sensation of a raindrop in her spine, the gentleman whose birthmark has begun to sprout hairs. Mrs. Das listened attentively, stroking her hair with a small plastic brush that resembled an oval bed of the nails, asking more questions for yet another example. The children were quite intent on stopping more monkeys in the tree, and Mr. Das was absorbed by his tour book. So it seems like a private conversation between Mr. Kepasi and Mrs. Das. In this manner, the next half an hour passed, and when they stopped for a lunch at the roadside restaurant, the sole feeders and the omelette sandwiches, usually something Mr. Kepasi looked forward to on his tours, so that he could sit in a peace and enjoy some hot teas. He was disappointed as the Das family settled together under a magenta umbrella fringed with the white and orange tassels, and placed their order with one of the waiters who marched about in an tri-cornered caps. Mr. Kepasi reluctantly headed towards a neighboring table. Mr. Kipasi, wait, there is a room here. Mrs. Das called out. She gathered Tino on her lap, insisted that he accompany them, and so together they had bottled a mango juice and a sandwiches and a plate of an onions and a potatoes deep fried in a garam flour batter. After finishing the two omelets, sandwiches, Mr. Das took more pictures of the group as they ate. How much longer? He asked Mr. Capasi, and he paused to load a new roll on his film in the camera. About half an hour more. By now, the children had forgotten up from the table to look at more monkeys perching in nearby tree. So there was considerable space between Mrs. Das and Mr. Kipasi. Mr. Das placed the camera to his face and squeezed one eye shut, his tongue exposed at the another corner of his mouth. This looks funny, Mina. You need to lean in closer to Mr. Kipasi. She did. He could smell a scent on her skin, like a mixture of whiskey and rose water. He worried suddenly that she would smell like perspiration, which he knew that had collected the beneath the synthetic material of his shirt. He polished off his mango juice in one pulp and smoothed his silver hair with his hand. A bit of a juice dripped on in his chin. He wondered if Mrs. Das had noticed. She had not. What is your address, Mr. Kipasi? She inquired, fishing for something inside her straw bag. You would like my address. So we can send you the copies, she said, of the pictures. She handed him a scrap of a paper which she had hastily ripped from a page of her film magazine. The blank portion was limited, for the narrow strip was covered up by the lines of a text and a tiny picture of a hero and a heroine embarrassing under a encyclopedic tree. The paper curled as Mr. Kipasi wrote his address in clear, careful letters. She would write to him, asking about his days interpreting at the doctor's office, and he would respond elongated, choosingly only the most entertaining anecdotes, one that would make her laugh out loud as she reads them in her houses in New Jersey. In time, she would reveal the disappointments of her marriage, and he is. In this way, their friendship would grow and flourish. He would possess a picture of that two of them eating fried onions under a magenta umbrella, which he could keep, he decided, safely tucked between the pages of his Russian grammar as his mind raced. Mr. Kipasi experienced a mild and a pleasant shock. It was similar to a feeling he used to experience long ago when, after months of translating with the aid of an dictionary, he would finally read a passage from a French novel or an Italian sonnet and understand the word one after another, unencumbered by his own effort. In those moments, Mr. Kipasi used to believe that all was right with the world, that all the struggles were rewarded, that all of our life mistakes made sense in the end. The promise that he would hear from Mr. Das now filled him with the same belief. When he finished writing his address, Mr. Kipasi handed her the paper. But as soon as he did so, he worried that he had neither misspelled his name or accidentally reversed the number of his postal code. He dreaded the possibility of a lost letter. The photograph never reached him. Hovering somewhere in Orissa, close by, ultimately unattainable. He thought of asking for the slip of a paper again, just to make sure he had written his address accurately. But Mrs. Das had already dropped it into a jumble of her bag. They reached Konark at 22:30. The temple, made of sandstone, was a massive pyramid like structure in the shape of an chariot. It was dedicated to the great master of a life, the sun, which struck three sides of an ellipse as if it has made its journey each day across the sky. 24 giant wheels were carved on the north and the south of the plinth. The whole thing was drawn by a team of 7 horses, speeding as if through the heavens. As they approached, Mr. Kipasiv explained that the temple has been built between AD 1243 and 1255 with the efforts of 1200 artists by the great rulers of Ganga dynasty. King Narsimadev I to the commando his victory against the Muslim army. It says the temple occupies 70 acres of the land. Mr. Das said, reading from his book, "It's like a desert," Ronnie said, his eye wandering across the sand that stretched on all his sides beyond the temple. The Chandarbanga River once flowed 1 mile north of here. It is dry now. Mr. Capacity said that, turning off the engine, they got out and walked towards the temple, posing first for the picture by the pair of lions that fangled the steps. Mr. Capacive led them next to one of the wheels of a chariot higher than any human being, 9 feet in diameter. The wheels were supposed to symbolize the wheel of a life, Mr. Das read. They despite the cycle of a creation, preservation, and the achievements of realization. Cool. He turned the page of his book. Each wheel is divided into 8 thick and thin spokes, dividing the day into 8 equal parts. The rims are carved with designs of birds and animals, whereas the metallization in the spokes are carved with women in luxurious poses, largely erotic in nature. When he refers to where the countless friezes of enlightened naked bodies making love in various positions, women slinging to the neck of a man, their knees wrapped eternally around their lovers' thighs. In addition to this were assorted scenes from daily life, of hunting and trading, of these being killed with a bow and arrow, and marching warriors holding the swords in their hand. It was no longer possible to enter the temple, for it had filled with rubble years ago. But they admired the exciters, as did all the tourists Mr. Capacive brought there. Slowly strolling along each of this side, Mr. Das trailed behind, taking the pictures. The children ran ahead, pointing to the figures of naked people, integrated in a particular by the Naganism, the half-human, half-serpentine couple who were said. Mr. Capasi told to them to live in the deepest water of the sea. Mr. Capasi was pleased that they liked the temple, pleased especially that it appealed to Mrs. Das. She stopped every 3 or 4 spaces, staring silently at the carved lovers, and the procession of an elephant and the topless female musician beating on 2 sides drums. Though Mr. Capasi had been to the temple countless times, it occurred to him as he too gazed at the topless women that he had never seen his own wife fully naked. Even when they have made love, she kept the panel of her blouse hooked together, the string of her petticoat knocked around her wrist. He had never admired the back of his wife's leg the way he knows admired those of Mrs. Das. Walking as if for the benefits alone, he had of course seen plenty of bare limbs before, belonging to the American and the European ladies who took his tour, but Mrs. Das was different. Unlike the other women who had an interest only in the temple and kept their noses buried in the guidebook, on their eye behind the lens of an camera. Mrs. Das has taken an interest in him. Mr. Capasi was anxious to be alone with her, to continue the private conversation, yet he felt nervous to walk at her side. She was locked behind her sunglasses, ignoring her husband's request that she pose for another picture, walking past her children as if they were strangers, worried that he might disturb her. Mr. Capasi walked ahead to admire as he always did. The three five-sized bronze avatar of Surya, the sun god, such emerging from its own niche on the temple facade to greet the sun at the dawn, noon, and evening. They wore an elaborate head dress, their elongated eyes closed, their bare chest draped with an carved chains and armlets. Hibiscus petals offering from the previous visitors were strewn at their grey-green feet. The last status on their northern wall of the temple was Mr. Capasi's favorite. This Surya had a tried expression, weary after a hard day of work, sitting aside a horse's wide folded leg. Even his horse eyes were drowsy. Around his body were smaller sculptures of a woman in a pair, the hips thrust to one side. "Who is that?" Mrs. Das asked. He was startled to see that she was standing beside him. "He is an Astala Surya," Mr. Capasi said, "the setting sun. So in a couple of hours the sun will set right here." She slipped out a foot out of one of her square-heeled shoes, rubbed her toes on the back of her other leg. "That is correct." She raised her sunglasses for a moment, then put them back once again. "Neat." Mr. Capasi was not certain exactly what the word suggested, but he had a feeling it was a favorable response. He hoped that Mrs. Das had understood Surya's beauty, his power. Perhaps they would discuss it further in their letters. He would explain things to her, things about India, and she would explain the things to him about America. In its own way, their correspondence would fulfill his dream of serving as an interpreter between the nation. He looked at her straw bag, delighted that his address lay nested among his content. When he pictured her so many thousands of miles away, he plummeted so much so that he had an overwhelming urge to wrap his arms around her, to freeze with her, even for an instant, in an embrace witnesses by his favorite Surya. But Mrs. Das had already started walking. "When do you return to America?" he asked, trying to sound facile. "In 10 days," he calculated. "A week to settle in, a week to develop the pictures, a few days to compose her letters, 2 weeks to get to India by air." According to his schedule, allowing room for delay, he would hear from Mrs. Das in approximately 6 weeks a time. The family was silent as Mr. Capasi drew them back a little past 43 to the Hotel Sandy Villa. The children had bought a miniature granite version of an chariot wheels at a souvenir stand, and they turned them around in their hands. Mr. Das continued to read his books. Mrs. Das untangled Tina's hair with her brush and divided it into 2 little ponytails. Mr. Capasi was beginning to dread the thought of dropping them off. He was not prepared to begin his 6 weeks wait to hear from Mrs. Das. As he stole glance at her in the rear mirror, wrapping elastic band around Tina's hair, he wondered how he might make the tour last a little longer. Ordinarily, he spent back to Puri using a shortcut, eager to return home. scrub his feet and hands with the sandalwood soap, and enjoy the evening newspaper and a cup of tea that his wife would serve him in silence. The thought of that silence, something to which he had long been resigned, now oppressed him. It was then he suggested visits the hills at Udaigiri and Kandagiri, where a number of monastic dwellings were viewed out of a grounds facing one another across a defile. It was some miles away, but well worth seeing, Mr. Kepasi told to them. Oh, yeah, there is something mentioned about it in this book, Mr. Das said. Built by a Jain king or something. Shall we go then? Mr. Kepasi asked. He paused at a turn in the road. Is to that left. Mr. Das turned to look at Mrs. Das. Both of them shrugged. Left, left, the children chanted. Mr. Kepasi turned the wheel, almost delirious with the relief. He did not know that what he would do or say to Mrs. Das once they have arrived at the hill. Perhaps he would tell her what a pleasing smile she had. Perhaps he would compliment her strawberry shirts, which he found irrespectively becoming. Perhaps when Mr. Das was busy taking a picture, he would take her hand. He did not have to worry when they got to the hills, divided by a steep path thick with the trees. Mrs. Das refused to get out of a car, although the path dozen of a monkey were seated on the stones, as well as on the branch of the trees. Their hind legs are stretched out of it front and raised to the shoulders, level, the arms resting on their knees. My legs are tired, she said, sinking low in her seat. I will stay here. Why did you have to wear those stupid shoes? Mr. Das said. You don't be in the pictures. Pretend I am there. But we should use one of these pictures for a Christmas card this year. We didn't get one of all 5 of us at the Sun's Temple. Mr. Kepasi could take it. I am not coming. Anyways, those monkeys give me the creeps. But they were harmless, Mr. Das said. They turned to Mr. Kepasi. Aren't they? They are more hungry than dangerous, Mr. Kepasi said. Do not provoke them with the food, and they will not bother you. Mr. Das headed up the defile with the children, the boy at his side, the little girl on his shoulder. Mr. Kepasi watched as they crossed the path with the Japanese men and women, the only other tourist there, who paused for a final photograph, then stepped into a nearby car and drove away. As the car disappeared out of view, some of the monkeys called out, emitting the smart, soft whooping sounds, and then they walked on their flat black hands and feet up the path. At one point, a group of them formed a little ring around Mr. Das and the children. Tina screamed in delight. Ronnie ran in circle around his father. Bobby bent down and picked up a fat stick on the ground. When he extended it, one of the monkeys approached him and snatched it, then briefly beat the ground. I will join them, Mr. Kepasi said. Unlocking the door on his side, there is much to explain about the caves. No, stay a minute, Mrs. Das said. She got out of a back seat and slipped it beside Mr. Kepasi. Raj had this damn book anyways. Together through the wine shield, Mrs. Das and Mr. Kepasi watched as Bobby and the monkey passes the stick back and forth between them. A brave little boy, Mr. Kepasi commented. It is not so surprising, Mrs. Das said. No, he is not his. I beg your pardon, Raj, he is not Raj's son. Mr. Kepasi felt a prickle on his skin. He reached into his shirt pocket for a small tin of a lotus oil balm he carried with him all the time and applied it to the 3 spots on his forehead. He knew that Mrs. Das was watching him, but he did not turn to her face. Instead, he watched as the figure of Mr. Das and the children grew smaller, climbing up the step path pausing every now and then for a picture, surrounded by a growing number of monkeys. Are you surprised? The way she put it made him choose this word with a care. It is not the type of things one assumes, Mr. Capassi replied slowly. He puts the tin on a lotus oil bomb back in his pocket. No, of course not. And no one knows, of course. No one at all. I have kept it a secret for 5 whole years. She looked at Mr. Capassi, tilted her chin as if to gain a fresh perspective. But now I have told you. Mr. Capassi nodded. He felt suddenly parched, and his forehead was warm and slightly numb from the bomb. He considered asking Mrs. Das for a sip of water, then decided against it. We met when we were young, very young, she said. She reached into her straw bag in a search of something. He pulled out a pack of puffed rice. Want some? No, thank you. She put a fistful in her mouth, sank into the sea and a little, and looked away from Mr. Capassi out the window on her side of the car. We married when we were still in the college. We were in the high school when he proposed to me. We went to the same college, of course. Back then, we couldn't stand the thought of being separated. Not for a day, not for a minute. Our parents were best friends who lived in the same town. My entire life, I saw him every weekend, either at our house or others. We were sent upstairs to play together while our parents joked about our marriage. Imagine, they were caught us at anything. Though in my way, I think it all more or less a setup. The things we did those Friday and Saturday nights while our parents sat downstairs drinking tea. I could tell you stories, Mr. Capassi. As a result of spending all her time in a college with Raj, she continued. She did not make many close friends. There was no one to confide in about him at the end of an difficulty days or to share a passing thought or a worry. Her parents now lived on the other side of the world, but she had never been very close to them. Anyways, after marrying so young, she was overwhelmed by it all. Having a child so quickly and nursing and warming up the bottles of milk and testing their temperatures against her wrist while Raj was at the work, dressed in a sweater and cruddy pants, teaching his student about the rocks and the dinosaurs. Raj never looked across or harried or pulp as he had become after the first baby. Always tried. She declines invitation from he one or two college's good friends to have lunch or shop in Mahantan. Even actually, the friends stopped calling her so that she was felt at home all the days with the baby, surrounded by the toys that made her trip when she walked or whines when he sat, always cross and tired. Only occasionally did they go out after Ronnie was born, and even more rarely did then entertain. Raj didn't mind. He looked forward to coming home from teaching and watching the television and bouncing Ronnie on his knee. He had been outracked when Raj told her that a Punjabi friend, someone whom she had once met him, did not remember, would be staying with them for a week for some job interviews in the new branch area. Bobby was convinced in the afternoon on a sofa littered with a rubber teething toy after the friend learned that a London pharmaceutical company had hired him. While Ronnie cried to be freed from his playpen, she made no protest when the friend touched the small of her back as he was about to make a pot of coffee, then pulled her against his crisp navy suit. He made love to her sniffly in the silence with an expertise she had never known, without the meaningful expression and smiles Raj always insisted on afterwards. Next day, Raj took the friends to JKF. He was married now to a Punjabi girl, and then they lived in London still. And every year they exchanged Christmas card with Raj and Meena, each couple's tucking photos of their families in their envelopes. He did not know that he was Bobby's father. He had never old. I beg your pardon, Mrs. Das, but why have you told me this information? Mr. Capassi asked when she has finally finished speaking and has turned to face him once again. For God's sake, stop calling me Mrs. Das. I'm 28. You probably have children my age. No, quite. It's disturbed Mr. Capassi to learn that she thought of him as a parent. That feeling he had towards her, that he had made his cheeks his reflections in their rearview mirror as they drove, evaporated a little. I told you because of your talents. She put the packet on the puffed rice bag into her hand without folding over the top. I don't understand, Mr. Capassi said. Do you see? For 8 years I haven't been able to express this to anybody, not to the friends, certainly not to Raj. He doesn't even suspect it. He thinks that I am still in love with him. Well, don't you have anything to say? About what? About what I have just told you. About my secret and about how horrible it makes me feel. I feel terrible looking at my children's and at Raj. Always terrible. I have terrible urges. Mr. Capassive to throw things away. One day I had the urge to throw everything I own out the window, the television, the children's, everything. Don't you think it is unhealthy? He was silent. Mr. Capassive, don't you have anything to say? I thought that was your job. My job is to give tours, Mrs. Das, not that, your other job as an interpreter. But we do not face a language barrier. What need is there for an interpreter? That's now what I mean. I would never have told you otherwise. Don't you realize what it means for me to tell you? What does it mean? It means that I am tired of feeling so terrible all the times. 8 years, Mr. Capassive, I have been in pain 8 years. I was hoping could you help me feel better, says the right thing, suggest some kind of remedy. He looked at her in her red plaid skirt and strawberry t-shirt, a woman not yet 30, who loved neither her husband nor her children, who had already fallen out of love with life. Her confession depressed him all the more when he thought of Mr. Das at the top of the path, Tina clinging on his shoulders, taking pictures of an ancient monastic cells cut into the hills to show his students in America, unexpecting and unaware that one of his sons was not his one. Mr. Capassive felt insulted that Mr. Das should ask him to interpret her common, trivial little secret. She did not resemble the patient in the doctor's office, those who came glassy eyed and desperate, unable to sleep on breath or urinate with ease, unable to, and above all, to give a words to their pains. Still, Mr. Capassive believed it, and was his duty to assist Mrs. Das. Perhaps he ought to tell her to confess the truth to Mr. Das. He would explain that honestly was the best policy. Honestly surely would help her feel better, as she had put it. Perhaps he would offer to preside over the discussion as a mediator. He decided to begin with the most obvious question to get to the heart of the matter. As so he asked, "Is it a really pain do you feel, Mrs. Das, or isn't guilt?" She turned to him and glad mustard oil thick on her front pink lips. She opened her mouth to say something, but as she glared at Mr. Capassive, some certain knowledge seems to pass before her eyes, and she stopped. It crushed him. He knew at the moment that he was not even important enough to be properly insulted. She opened the car door and began walking up the path, moving a little on her square wooden heels, reaching in her straw bag to eat handful of puffed rice. It fell through her fingers, leaving a zigzagging trail, causing a monkey to leap down from a tree and to devour the little white grains. In search of a more, the monkey began to follow Mrs. Das. Other joined him, so that she was soon being followed by half a dozen of them, their velvety tails dragging behind. Mr. Capacive stepped out of a car. He wanted to hold her, to alert her in some way, but he worried that if she knew that they were behind her, she would grow nervous. Perhaps she would lose her balance. Perhaps they would pull at her back or her hair. He begins to jog up the path, taking a fallen branch in his hand to scare away the monkeys. Mrs. Das continued walking, oblivious, trailing grains on her puffed rice. Near the top of an incline, before a group of a cell fronted by a row of an quiet stone pillar, Mr. Das was kneeling on the ground, focusing the lens of his camera. The children stood under the arcade, now hidden, now emerging from view. Wait for me, Mrs. Das called out. I am coming. Tina jumped up and down. Here comes Mommy. Great, Mr. Das said without looking up. Just in time. We will get Mr. Capaci to take pictures of 5 of us. Mr. Capacive quickened his pace, waving his branch so that the monkey cramped away, distracted in another direction. Where is Bobby? Mrs. Das asked when she stopped. Mr. Das looked up from the camera. I don't know. Ronnie, where is Bobby? Ronnie shrugged. I thought he was right there. Where is he? Mr. Das repeated sharply. What's wrong with you all? They began calling his name, wandering up and down a path a bit. Because they were calling, they did not entirely hear the boy's scream. When they found him, a little farther down the path under a tree, he was surrounded by a group of monkeys, over a dozen of them pulling at his t-shirt with their long black fingers. The puffed rice Mrs. Doll had spilled was shattered at his feet, racked over by the monkey's hand. The boy was silent, his body frozen, sniff, tears running down his straggled face. His bare legs were dusty and red with the wilt when where one of the monkeys struck him repeatedly with the stick he had given to his earlier.